And it really is a gift for your family. It's not a gift necessarily. Let me say this. It is a gift because when you tell your stories, when we get to tell our stories and somebody really, really listens to our stories, that makes people so happy. It just lifts your soul that you get to tell this story about what you did and how you were. And as we get older, there are less and less people to listen to our stories. But it's also a gift to your, maybe not so much your children. It is, but children might have heard the story before, but your grandchildren and their children. And this is a piece of your legacy. This is a piece of your history that you pass down in generations, because families repeat patterns. There are actually patterns that families live out of in their lives. And if I map out a family for somebody and I show them that their grandparents or their great grandparents, and sometimes it's not always great habits, but alcoholism, mental illness, some sorts of behavior patterns that some people are just really, really stubborn like me. And I got it honest. I got it from my mom and my dad, and they got it from their parents. So things like that can be kind of humorous, but true at the same time.
Right.
But if you can do this ahead of time and get everything in order, then your family, when you pass, can actually grieve and can actually enjoy the stories. When I ended up at my father's casket the day after Christmas 2 years ago, I stood there and I couldn't even cry. I was so tired. I was so worn out. I had 500 things I still had left to do, and I just couldn't even cry. And I just stood there. Now, it hit me later, but I would like for it to have been at that moment that I could have relaxed into the grief and let the grief just hold me for a few minutes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm totally not even getting into entrepreneurial stuff. We'll have to cover that before we go.
Of course.
I'm just so intrigued by this topic and I have so many questions. So like you said, nobody likes to talk about it.
Right.
This isn't my selfish question. This is another one that I think everybody could use some help with.
Okay.
What do you think is the best approach? Like, I feel like on some level, there's an acknowledgement thing, right? Like if somebody at work, or I just met you and you told me about your father, we often hear, I'm sorry for your loss or whatever. What do you think is a good way to approach that so that it helps the grieving person?
I think, that it just acknowledging it is the biggest step. Some people don't even say anything because they don't know what to say. And they're afraid that they're going to upset the person or they're going to make them start crying, because we are so uncomfortable with negative emotions as a people, as human beings, and we avoid them. We do our best to get away from them and ignore them, when in actuality, that's what we need to do. I know in other countries around the world, they have mourners who actually wail and just moan. And the Western world and, the United States, we are really uncomfortable with that. We're uncomfortable with grief and sadness. But if you can just acknowledge it, I am so sorry to hear about your loss. I am so sorry. Just acknowledging it and allowing space for the other person for just a moment to know that you truly see their sadness and their grief.
I've gone to 2 funerals, 3. Well, I've been to a lot, but there's 2 that I'm going to reference just from this year. And I thought they were both very well done. In March, one of our friends had COVID and we lost him after a few weeks on the ventilator. We didn't have the services until maybe May or June. It was obviously a while later, and it was a COVID kind of funeral. But what I really thought was beautiful, he was studying to be a priest, as a matter of fact. He's 70 years old. Talk about starting over and shifting gears. And he was just beautiful, beautiful man. And it was in the midst of, so I don't know the timing, but all the craziness with Black Lives Matter and all of that. And it was a very diverse funeral. Mm-hmm. And it was so beautiful because the fellow that preached addressed, like, because Oscar had such a relationship with his God and he was so open about it, it was almost like the true version of celebration. And I don't know if it's sometimes dictated by the people involved in the planning, but I guess I'm just kind of sharing experiences. And for the people left behind, I found that a lot better for me. For going through that loss, it was a lot better. And then just recently, I had gone to Kansas City. One of my girlfriends had lost her husband, and he was an avid golfer. And I'd never seen anything like this, but she did. It was so beautiful. We were at a golf course, and it was almost like how weddings have themes. Mm-hmm. This was a golf theme. There were centerpieces with his old golf carts and, flowers out of a golf bag. It was just beautiful. Do you tend to favor these celebrations versus old school, or do you just kind of sit back and, like, if someone was confused, like there's people who are spiritual, right? So I imagine they have certain practices in mind, or from a religion perspective, like we're old school Italian. So it's very long services when it's a family member and it's up, down with the knees and all that stuff. So I've experienced those as well. But if they're undecided, do you advocate one way or another? Do you see that there's I don't want to say a better result. I don't know if my question's landing right, but that it's more helpful when people are doing it from a celebratory perspective, or is it just so unique grief across the board?
Well, the grief itself is universal, and how you demonstrate that is what's unique. So it depends on the family, and it depends on, I guess, the majority of members that are remaining, that are doing the celebration, and what is going to be comforting to them. If the person has not made any plans, and let's say they're not very spiritual or not necessarily religious in any fashion, faith system or whatever, then if the family doesn't have any preferences, I just have to feel my way along as a pastor, and just through conversation and questions and counseling to see where everybody is with this. Is it an angry family? Are they angry that this person left and they're dead and they left and they didn't say goodbye and I wasn't there? And so, if it's an angry situation, then I'll tend to help guide in a direction that I feel like might be healing and helpful that way. If the family comes together and they are uncertain, but there is an air of spirituality, then it'll go in a different direction. It just depends on the family and what they need. It's not about me or my thoughts or beliefs. It's about what's going to be the best for the family.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you started Guardian Gifts after your father's passing?
I actually started thinking about it before his passing. As I said, he was in a nursing home, and my parents were very poor when I was growing up. And so they worked all their lives, and they owned their home. They worked hard to pay for their home. And the government, a lot of people don't realize, if you don't have like a long-term care insurance, or if you don't have enough money to pay, and you go into a nursing home and you have to go on Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid, and they will pay for that, but you have to pretty much be indigent or poverty bound. So they will say, if you own anything, the government wants you to sign it over to them to help pay back, the cost. But my mother was adamant that she wasn't going to do that. She said, I've worked all my life. This is the only thing I have to leave when I die to you and your brother, and I'm not doing that. So I had to figure out a way for my dad to be in the nursing home. And the answer was to put the house in a trust. And so we did that, but DSS, Department of Social Services, balked at that. And so I ended up hiring an attorney and who specialized in, estate planning and such. And we had to have a hearing with Department of Social Services. And so I went through a lot and learned a lot. Like I said, I'm a lifelong learner, so I take notes along the way. But I learned a lot, and we got Dad into a nursing home. And so I started thinking about it then. And so, yes, I was thinking about, I was sitting there in social services that day, and I'm like, gosh, I can afford to hire an attorney for my parents. There are so many people in here that have no clue and don't realize, and there's got to be a better way. There has to be a better way to do this. So I started thinking about it then, but the day that I was standing there at Dad's coffin and I couldn't cry, I knew that day, I was like, I'm going to create something. I'm going to come up with some way, some service, some plan to help people through, to help them plan. If I can get them to plan earlier, then it will be so much simpler later.
Yeah, I love this. You're the third person like in our ecosystem that has this as a passion. You all have different skill sets aligned with it, but cherishing the memories, documenting the memories, helping people through the process, planning ahead. I'm seeing a consistent theme across the board with all three of you, which is like you're starting your own movement almost. And
Yeah.
it's refreshing. Like I said, as a survivor going to funerals or dealing with death, it sounds so much more relieving, or I don't know. I don't know the right words. I'm not being very eloquent right now, but I appreciate what you're doing is the moral of the story.
Well, thank you. It induces peace. It's peace. It fills your heart with peace. It lets go some of the stress and the strain of having to make decisions when you're in an emotional state and you don't need to be making those kinds of decisions. And then people go back later and they say, oh, I wish I'd done this different, or I'm not real sure that I picked out the right music, or, there's all these questions that people tend to beat themselves up with later because they don't know, they don't have, if it was planned out, that's my thing. If it's planned out and talked about,